All right, so here I am. I'm here to talk about what's new in EnviroInsite in our upcoming 7 release. Working very hard to get everything squared away in time for that release, and I'm happy to share all this with you today. So let's get started with that. All right, so this you're probably familiar with. This is a common graphic that's frequently showed at the beginning or some point within any discussion of EQuIS. I made a few little modifications. We're down here in EnviroInsite. Usually this just mentions third-party products, but I kind of changed the lines because really EQuIS EnviroInsite basically consumes data from EQuIS. So I added this one line here pointing in this direction because it's not coming through Pro as most of the third-party interfaces are. And also I added lines kind of going from EnviroInsite to Professional and from EnviroInsite going to the dashboard widgets, because that's something that we're beginning to develop, and some of that's going to be coming out in either 7 or in the 7.1 or 7.2 releases. All right, so what we're talking about today is basically changes that have been made since our latest release. The latest release that is out, we call it EnviroInsite 2016. And that came out sometime in late fall, or what says here, December 2017. So it's basically over the last 6 months, things that we've been working on to develop. All right, so this is an overview of the sort of the most important ones. I'm going to describe these in more detail later on, and it's basically faster data queries, which is essential working in EnviroInsite when you're consuming like large amounts of data. We've translated a lot of the code from C++ to C#. There's a new data field called isScreenYN, and we'll talk about that and what it does. We've improved the portability to ArcMAP, and I'm going to show you how that's done. There are a number of changes to the boring log reports and bug fixes, of course. And finally, and these are the things I was talking about before, where we're beginning to work with enterprise and professional. And so we can now take a boring log and deliver that into an easy view widget in enterprise. And we also have the ability to create forms within professional. And I have some screenshots to kind of give you a sense of what that is. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So let's get into it. So first thing is faster data queries. And I almost would have to confess that this is almost a bug fix. And it's kind of what happens when you develop your code using the Springfield database. You don't realize that other things can go on when you're dealing with a more commercial scale database. And so we began to encounter those as more and more people are using EnviroInsite. So we looked at, there was some code that didn't properly take account of the fact that most databases are going to have multiple facilities in them, and that you want to make sure your code is specified, written such that you're not querying all these other facilities inadvertently when you really want to get to the database that you have, or excuse me, the facility that you have selected, or your facility of interest. There were also some issues with selecting a multiple analytes. So if you've ever used EnviroInsite, you go, yeah, that was a problem. We've resolved a lot of that. I think we're going to continue to see some improvements to the data queries as we go forward. So from C++ to C#, a lot of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but C++ was kind of the shiny new object in programming languages about 10 years ago. And it was used a lot for developing Windows desktop applications. And since that time, C# has become more of the standard. And we realized that we had to eliminate that C++ code and move it to C#, in part because we want to get more of the Earthsoft developers involved in maintaining and continuing to develop EnviroInsite. So I would say there's probably several 100,000 lines of code that were changed. A lot of it is just syntax, but nonetheless, those changes were made. We're not 100% there. There's some code for various reasons that's difficult to make that transition. We're going to continue to look at those and see if in the future we could continue to get rid of that kind of legacy code. All right, so let's get into some of this is, I realize, kind of down in the weeds. Other things, hopefully you'll hear, will be things that you're kind of excited about. One of these is this new data field. It's in RT well segment type, and it's called isScreenYN. And I think you can tell from the name, it basically says if you see segment, here's RT well segment type. If you see a segment type of, in this case, screen, is that a screen or isn't it? Well, obviously a screen is a screen, so we put Y. But often, you might have other things. It's not even necessarily a screen, but it might be any sample interval that might be stored in DT well segment. So it could be a transducer or something else. And you want to have the top and bottom elevation or depth defined in DT well segment. Well, this is a way of doing that, of telling the program to consider those as sample intervals. Improve portability to ArcMAP. So one of the questions I almost always get when I go to like user group meetings or dealing with other people where Esri products are really, foremost with use with EnviroInsite. People say, I really like certain things you're doing because I can't do those or can't do them easily, but I want them in Esri. And there was always, it was kind of, I'd have to kind of like say, well, yeah, you can do it, but it's not easy, and and for a number of reasons, I never really had a direct answer for that. And now I think we really do have a really good direct answer for that. And it's really done through a CAD export. So the reason we're using a CAD export rather than a shapefiles, CAD sends over a number of attributes that the ArcMAP, for example, can handle, and it helps you to define, for example, line types or colors. So this is kind of the workflow to do that. You would come in here, right-click on an object you want to export. In this case, it's data table. You click CAD export, and what it actually, behind the scenes, you don't see it, it's going to explode the blocks. So it takes groups of like lines and polylines and text and breaks them up into their pieces and saves that out to CAD. That's important because ArcMAP doesn't really know what to do with blocks within CAD files. So that's number one, you save those features to CAD. Number two, you add the CAD file as a data layer. And this is just an example here of a data table that I moved over from EnviroInsite to ArcMAP. So here's EnviroInsite. And here it is essentially within ArcMAP. So you can see it's pretty close, a representation of what you have within EnviroInsite. So you add the files, the data layer. You're not exactly done yet because you need to define the symbology. But the nice thing is that we have color indices, for example, that you can associate with colors within ArcMAP. You can use the line types to determine whether to basically get consistency between what you see in EnviroInsite and what you get within ArcMAP. And another really great thing that we've done is we've added text styles. So for example, one of them might be table header or table body. So these are easily associated with what you have within EnviroInsite. So you can determine, well, you can see in this case, it's like the header text is a little bigger. These are actually in map dimensions, and you could change the color. So for example, in this example here, you can see I have the table header text is white. So it's easy to make those kind of decisions and get the appearance or customization that you want. So this is really a big deal. I'll probably have an office hour. I'm gonna suggest that we have an office hour to talk about it. There have been a number, so that's the portability issue. There have been a number of changes to boring logs, both in the fields that we access and also in how we handle plotting and water levels. And I'll just I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. There's just a number. A lot of these are kind of client driven or also driven by our blue team, which develops Edge and Collect, and they have certain workflows that they recommend to their clients or to Earthsoft's clients, and we want to make sure we handle those within our boring logs. So one of the first changes we made is to add the table names in the design window. So this is our template design window. You can see it's DT facility, DT coordinate, DT location. Previously, it was just like a long list of field names, and now we have these table and field names, so it makes it easier for people to understand. Aha, now I know where, for example here, percent rock recovery is coming from DT sample parameter. So that's just makes it a lot easier to use the template, and I find it a lot easier to just turn it over to clients, because formerly I would be, there were just so many questions people would have about where the data is coming from. We've added a number of fields that are selectable that you can now add to a boring log. So if you want to put the facility name, client name, address, city, or state on your boring log, that's directly selectable from your template design window. So those are all fields from DT facility. Some have been requested. We also had a request to use data from either DT drill activity or DT drill parameter. So if you're using those fields, and especially if you're using Collect or Edge, you probably are using those fields, and those are now selectable, and those can be posted either as, in this case, header footer data or downhole interval data. We now have a new water level plot, and this is within the boring logs. And previously, whenever you wanted to put the water level, it was always associated with another plot. So you draw the axes and you say show, and then you'd place, there'd be a checkbox say show the water levels on my axis, or you'd have like a data from DT downhole point data, and the same thing is like a checkbox. Please, post the data on the water level. And one of the kind of limitations is the program would go to DT water table, and I forget, it would either get the average value of the values at that location, or maybe got the last, I think it actually got the last value, excuse me. But anyways, we've improved that. So now you can select based on 2 additional fields. So you can select based on DT water table sequence and type, and only get like specific measurements of the water table depth. So that's a big improvement. And here's just an example. Here's the template on the left side, and we have like 3 water level downhole plots. And here you can see in the log, essentially, they're basically at 3 different elevations because we've picked different sequence / type values, and they plot obviously at different depths. Another thing, I always how we handle DT downhole point data when we're plotting that on a boring log, and it never occurred to me, because this is point data, that you would have an end depth, but in fact, EQuIS does allow you to put an end depth in there. And so now we do handle that end depth. If the end depth is populated, in other words, if you populated this field in DT downhole point data, instead of just posting the number, it'll actually post the number and then put the start depth and the end depth, basically as lines, like you see here. All right, so that's the boring log. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you here is the ability to bring EnviroInsite into EQuIS Professional. And I'm going to consider this more along the lines of a preview, because it's not going to be released within 7. Although if you ask really nice, I think they might give it to you. I'm not sure exactly what our policy is going to be on that, because it's the code's basically there. Has not gone through all of the QA that we obviously pride ourselves in doing. So there's 6 reports. 3 of them are map reports. So you can do analyte concentration map, free product thickness map, water level and particle tracking map. Then 3 of them are what you think of like page-centric type reports. So one is boring log, Piper diagram, and then a stiff diagram. Okay, so these are all what we call form reports. So you can get them you go to the home thing, and whatever you call this other ribbon, and you pick forms, and you get this list, and then you can pick one of these form reports. And here's kind of what it looks like. So on the left, you got this familiar parameter menu, selection menu. You can save the parameter values out and then restore them later on if you like. And then you get the form opening up within EnviroInsite. So you kind of get EnviroInsite inside of EQuiS Professional. It's essentially the same thing that you would get if you did this within EnviroInsite. However, it's a lot, for people that are not familiar with EnviroInsite, this might be a lot easier, more accessible to you. And one of the nice things is it's not a static image. So you're not just getting, it's not running EnviroInsite and just throwing up a JPEG file and posting that there. It's actually like a live window into EnviroInsite. So one of the things that people frequently comment on is the fact that you can move labels around. So you can grab these labels and move them around so they're not overlapping. You can move the legend, you can move the north arrow, the scale bar. That's all accessible to you. In fact, you can even, and I think I have a next slide. Yeah, if you double click, for example, on the contours or any of the other objects here, you get the full dialog box that you would get as if you were in EnviroInsite. So this gives you access to a lot of additional options or features within particular plots that are just too expansive to put into that very simple parameter menu that you're familiar with within EQuiS. So I think it's been really useful for people that just want to throw a quick map, throw some values up on a map, and don't want to have to open EnviroInsite and then work from there. All right, and likewise, and this is actually something that we hope to have out with 7. We've run into a few licensing issues that we're resolving at this point, and also kind of delivery issues. How are you going to package some additional files that are going to have to go into your enterprise bin folder, if you're familiar with enterprise. So I'm calling this a boring log delivery by enterprise. And so essentially, it's going to be a boring log that you're going to be able to get from a EasyView widget. And actually, if you're using Collect, they've even incorporated it into their maps. So you can click on a location and say you want a boring log, and it'll generate a boring log and then produce it to you as a PDF. And it's generating it live. These are not like static images that have been saved away somewhere. It's actually generating it based on the live data. So this is kind of the workflow that you have to go through to be able to generate these boring logs in enterprise. You create the template, in other words, the design template in the standalone EnviroInsite, and you upload that to the database. So you actually have those templates stored in the database. It's a nice way so different people can share the templates without having to create them or handle the files themselves. You publish the report from Professional, and then you add that report to an EasyView widget, which is, this is all kind of enterprise speak, hopefully. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And then finally, when you have that widget, which is just going to be like a button or a kind of a rectangular area within enterprise, you press the button and it spits out a PDF with the boring, a full multi-page boring log. So it's really, I think it's going to be really very popular, and we're hoping good things for this. So I think that kind of does it for the new features, or the major new features, and maybe some other little sort of smaller ones that are there. We've also done a lot of bug fixes, and I'm not going to go into all of these, but they're out there, and I think it's really, I'm kind of excited because I think the program's getting, not that it wasn't stable before, but it's just, rock solid and really much easier to work in. And fixing like little things like this one here, improve the symbol size designation time series charts. And I know what this is. It's kind of, this is really down in the weeds, but it's something that really makes it easier to work with the program, substantially easier. And I think people are going to appreciate all of these collection of fixes that are out there. One of them that in particular was always an issue for me was the fact that when we did a PDF export of these images, for example, this is an image from ArcGIS Online. And like the images come in lat long or some other coordinate system, and sometimes they're tilted. And when they present it initially on the screen, that's not a problem because EnviroInsite just kind of chops off the edges and makes them like this nice rectangle. But then when you went to do a PDF export, you get like, it didn't really respect the fact that you had cropped it in that way. And so we've improved that and are able to now deliver a much better product. All right, so that is kind of a nutshell of what is new with EQuiS EnviroInsite. And as you see, we have upcoming presentations scheduled. The next one will be next week, same time, on EQuiS Enterprise. And if you're interested in any of these, we can get you information. Hopefully you'll already signed up for them. So there's a lot I can tell you, and just from my own experience using some of the new programs, there's a lot out there. There's been a lot of really great changes made, and people are going to, I think you're going to be really happy when you see this. So I encourage you to sign up. Did you want to say something, Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I just wanted to mention I added the registration link for the enterprise session to the chat window. And if you want to register for all the rest of those in the series, there is the link to our office hours schedule on the website as well.
Great, thank you.
So I hope that what Bruce showed all of you is exciting. I'm excited about the changes that are coming in EQuiS 7. And I encourage you to sign up for the additional sessions coming up. We will have some sessions later on in the year talking about actual functionality and walking through, how to use some of the changes in the interfaces. Like Bruce mentioned, that there are certain things that will probably require a little bit more instruction. We'll certainly set up office hours for that as well. So these what's new sessions are not the end all be all in the content that we're going to release on EQuiS 7. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thanks, Bruce, for presenting this. We hope you have a wonderful remainder of the week.